Richmond and Bushra in Ruislip. They're going to be answering your questions on 0345 6060 973. You can text your question to 84850 as well. And you can, of course, watch us on the Global Player on the LBC website, YouTube channel, Facebook and Twitter feeds.
On your radio, on Global Player and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock. Ministers are understood to have abandoned the idea of an amber watch list of countries under international travel rules being reviewed this week. The new category was being considered for nations at risk of being moved into the red group under the traffic light system, but it's been dropped following a backlash from the travel industry and some Tory MPs. The NHS COVID-19 app is being updated in England and Wales, so fewer contacts will be told to isolate. Hundreds of thousands of people have been pinged, causing major staff shortages for businesses. Here's our Westminster correspondent, Ben Kentish.
Whereas currently, when someone tests positive, the app looks for who they might have come into contact with in the previous 5 days. They are going to amend that so it is only the previous 2 days.
Figures suggest the third wave of COVID-19 hospital admissions in England may have peaked. NHS England says just under 600 were recorded on July the 31st, down 19% on the previous week and the lowest daily number since July the 16th. Poland has granted a visa to the Belarusian Olympic sprinter who refused to fly home from Japan. Kristina Tsimanouskaya says she feared for her safety after she criticised the way officials were managing her team. Great Britain have finished day 10 of the Games with an 11th gold medal. It came in equestrian's team eventing competition, with Tom McEwen also claiming silver in the individual event. Weightlifter Emily Campbell won silver. In the city, the FTSE 100 closed up 49 points at 70.81. The pound buys $1.38 and €1.17. LBC weather: heavy showers and thunderstorms across southern areas tonight, with localised flooding, dry elsewhere, and lows ranging from 8 to 15 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Andy Ivy.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 8 on LBC. I'm Iain Dale. Welcome to Cross Question, Monday's edition. I'm joined in the studio by David Mellor, former Conservative Cabinet Minister and LBC presenter. Bushra from Ruislip is with us, our first of two listeners who are joining our panel today. Chris in Richmond is the other. He's in Leicester Square in our main studio. And also Ross Clark joins us on the panel. He's a Telegraph and Spectator journalist. They are eagerly awaiting your questions. 0345 6060 973. You can ask them anything you like. I always say within reason. And you can, of course, watch us on the Global Player, LBC website at lbc.co.uk, LBC's YouTube channel, Facebook or Twitter feeds as well.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. Let's crack on with our first question. It's from our old friend Sean in Concert. Hello, Sean.
Hello, Ian, mate. How are you doing? How are you doing, panel? Sorry, couldn't get me words.
Don't know why it's so funny, Sean.
A few Newcastle brands tonight, eh?
Sean, we were hoping to get you on our panel, but unfortunately,
I haven't got a computer, mate. I'm sorry. I would love to have been on.
Well, we're going to.
It needs to be done.
We're going to think of ways of getting you on in the future. Right, what would you like to ask them?
I want to ask David Mellor, you know your party's so corrupt. Why have we got to wait till spring
Actually,
for this?
forgive me, I am not a member of the Conservative Party and haven't been for quite a lot of years. But
I know, but you were.
Yeah, I was, but there's a difference in you were and you are.
But
forgive me, I won't correct any more facts. It's not an issue. You just say what you like, and
go on, Sean. Go on, Sean.
I want to know why we've got to wait till the spring to get our justice for this corrupt government.
What you mean for the inquiry?
For the public inquiry.
Right. So why do we have to wait?
Why can't it not be brought forward to February or something like that at the end of January?
Okay. David Mellor.
I've no idea.
Do you think it ought to be brought forward?
I think there are other important things to do. It'd certainly be important to have an inquiry, but I'm not keen to waste valuable time on our friend That's all I want to say.
Well, that's his question. I mean, it's a reasonable question to ask.
He asked me whether it should be brought forward, or when it's going to happen, and I said I've no idea.
Okay.
And I have no idea. I have no idea.
Well, I hope we get a slightly more expansive answer to the next question.
If you get a more intelligent question.
Bushra, you work in the health service. When do you think the inquiry should be?
So I do work in the health service. I'm a GP in West London. I agree with David, actually. I think, of course, we need to have an inquiry. There are lots of things to learn from how the pandemic was handled. I mean, I could give a few examples.
Please do.
Discharging patients back to care
Absolutely.
homes is the one that springs to mind, because I saw the aftermath of that. PPE acquisition. I mean, I could go on, but I'm not.
Little friends of the health secretary getting the.
So you do have
contract.
things to say on this, David?
Of course I do. I just want to say it to our friend up the road with his Newcastle brand.
But I completely agree with David that I'm not in government. When that should happen, I hope they're planning a good inquiry so we can learn for future planning.
Well, the argument that they come up with for not having it before March is that they think that everybody who's been involved should be concentrating on the fight against the pandemic between now and then. And if they were constantly having to worry about the evidence they were giving, their eye would be taken off the ball. Do you buy that argument?
I can buy that argument, but I do look forward to a robust inquiry where all the things I've raised and more are looked into.
Okay.
They're frightened to death. You know that, Iain, and I know.
What do you think they're frightened of?
They're frightened of the facts. Why was Boris not available for any of these emergency meetings? What was he doing so important with his family that he couldn't join up? Why were they giving away PPE to China? There was no forward planning, no grasp of what the implications of this could have been. And before people say, well, you would say that, what do you know about it? I was Minister of Health during the AIDS pandemic, when we didn't have lots of so-called experts leaping up and down, contradicting themselves and telling government how to do it. But I believe nobody suggested that the AIDS epidemic had been badly handled. Although if you remember, it was thought at the time it could have become a pandemic. It was handled calmly, and I'm congratulating Norman Fowler here as the original Secretary of State. It was handled with authority. Precious little authority has been put into it by this government.
OK, Chris in Richmond, what are your views on when the inquiry should be held?
Well, I think it needs to start now. We're 18 months into the pandemic. The excuse that, well, we're busy with it doesn't really wash anymore when we've been told that, that we're opening up everything. So you can't have opening up at the same time as telling us that we have to wait longer. There's a few other points. Firstly, we need to learn the lessons now before the next pandemic, which is a point that Jeremy Hunt, the former Health Secretary, has made on repeated occasions in the House of Commons. But also, we are the land of public inquiries. Look at Hillsborough, look at Grenfell. These things drag on. Chilcott's even worse. If we are going to do it, we have to report quickly and rapidly, because otherwise it's useless.
How can you have a proper public inquiry and do it quickly? By definition, if it's a proper inquiry, you can't cut corners. It's going to take time.
Yeah, you're right. You shouldn't be cutting corners, but you can do it in chunks. You could look at the PPE section first, then you could look at care homes, then at travel. You could easily chunk it up and look at stuff in 4-6 month periods. Because otherwise, if we report in 10 years' time, the next pandemic will be on the way and there'll be more dead. Is my view.
I'll tell you what, this pandemic has made me chunk up a bit, but that's another story.
What is chunking up?
Well, I think he means put it in sections, but in my language, chunking up means putting on weight, which, as you can see,
well, I'm at best a silver medalist at that.
Ross Clark, when do you think the COVID inquiry should be held?
I think there's a very good argument for leaving it till next year, because I think with the pandemic we are only halfway through Act 2 at the moment, and just think, if we started a inquiry a few months ago, we'd have been praising Australia to the rafters for having controlled the pandemic in the way it had done. And look at it now, Australia's sort of in this sort of death spiral of endless lockdowns whenever there are a couple of cases, whereas, in Britain, we accept that the virus has gone endemic and we're controlling it with vaccines quite well. We're in a better place than Australia is. Go back a bit further, you would have condemned Britain for, locking down too slowly and praise other sort of European countries for locking down quickly. It's a constantly changing story. And until we've really got this thing under control, I think it's best to leave off the inquiry until we've got some kind of ending to discuss.
Well, one of my former producers has just texted me saying, would David Mellor agree to appear on a future cross-question panel with Sean from Concert? I think that would be box office listening. And
how much is the fee? Have to be more than a can of Newcastle Brown.
Sean, what do you make of what you've heard?
Brown. I don't like Newcastle Brown.
I actually do, fun enough, but we can't agree about anything, can we, Sean? Sad.
No, but to get justice...
Are you a Newcastle supporter or not?
No, I'm not. I'm a Sunderland supporter and a Celtic supporter.
Actually, I've always had a bit of time for Sunderland, so we're getting near to an agreement.
Right, Sean, what do you make of what you've heard?
I just think it's all tosh, like. I think the people, 150,000 dead here. People want answers. People want answers of what's going on, what corruption's been going on, where the money's being, billions of pounds has been going. Isn't it about time we found out, like, instead of giving it to the corrupt mates?
I mean, David, there is a point there, isn't it? Because as Chris said, you could do it in sections, and that there are things that you could start the inquiry into now and not leave it until next year, not have any effect on people having to take their eye off the ball.
But I don't think anyway one should wait. A lot of decisions should await an inquiry, which will be a farce and a shambles. There are lessons that should be learnt now. I mean, when you think about test and trace, how much has been spent on that?
37 billion, apparently.
I mean, it's ridiculous. Don't forget,
the budget.
Going back into ancient history. I was Chief Secretary of the Treasury when we turned in, not because of anything I did, I happened to be the chap, it was on my watch, 30%, the national debt was 30% of the GDP of this country. Now it's over 100%. That deterioration over 30 years will take generations to pay off. I was spending a bit of time with my 3-year-old granddaughter. I thought, poor little soul, you're going to be paying for this shambles for the rest of your life. And probably your children will be too.
I hope she's getting a big inheritance.
Well, that's what she hopes. She's very friendly to her granddad. So, yes, she probably does hope that.
Bushra, if you were starting this inquiry now, which aspect would you look at first?
I think the two things that I've mentioned. So, I went into the pandemic without any PPE, without any support. No. I was there on the ground, and myself and my partners had to plan, and actually local authorities did very well. And we got once the vaccinations were available, we did an amazing job rolling them out. Discharging patients with coronavirus, the most vulnerable patient group. I mean, actually, perhaps I should have raised that first into back into the care homes with no support, again with
Having
no PPE.
Said they wouldn't take risks.
That's unforgivable.
Chris, if you were to chunk it up as you put it, what would you do first?
Well, the first thing I'd look at was the lockdown decisions. I mean, the Christmas one, for example, was just absolutely disgraceful. Keir Starmer was telling Boris Johnson for weeks, you need to think about cancelling Christmas. Boris said, don't cancel Christmas. It would be terrible for people. And then, what does he do? And then he has a lockdown in, the beginning of January after kids had gone back to school for one day. The second thing is the travel thing. It was an absolute farce. Even Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, was saying that she, in a meeting with, I think, some of their members, said that she felt that the border should have been closed much earlier. So to me, the lockdowns and the travel are the two things that need looking at, and they're very easy to look at.
Ross?
Well, I don't know what should be first, but I think one of the central things that I really want to be discussed is the use of this sort of daily statistic bulletin, which I think has spread fear beyond the level which is justified by the disease. We get hammered over the head with this daily death figure, and have done for the past 18 months, without any context of who is dying, what age they are, what other conditions they might be suffering from. We don't get fed the sort of daily deaths from cancer, heart disease, road traffic accidents, and all the rest. And I think this use of stats in the way they've been used has framed the debate of what we.
I think there was a time for. I think there was a time for that. I'm not sure what the value is at the moment, but when we had 1,000 people a day dying of COVID, I think that probably was something the public needed to know so they could act appropriately.
Yes,
at the moment.
What I think is that what people don't realise, though, is that just number of deaths doesn't really mean very much. If you look at the overall mortality rate, which is what I think we should have been looking at throughout this pandemic, if you look for 2020, it was 8% above the average for the past 10 years. Just took us back to the year 2008, really. This year, the mortality rate is actually lower than it has been for the average of the past 10 years. And that is in spite of that huge peak we had in January. So, the idea that this has been sort of some existential threat to the human population or to the British
and what about the average?
Sorry.
And what about the average age?
Hang on, Chris.
Sorry.
David?
What about the average age of people who died from COVID? 82.
Chris?
150,000 dead, Ross. I mean, how many more do you want before we say the statistics don't matter? I really don't understand that.
Well, no, I thought that they don't matter. They should be put in the context. And what matters
Of
is
60 million who haven't died.
150,000 deaths. It's the number of life years that are being lost and quality adjusted life years that are being lost. That's what matters, not just the overall. And of course, we know that, some people have been dying of other things and they've had COVID as well and they've gone down as a COVID death.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
Ross, I do disagree with that. I've done death certificates with COVID, and the accuracy of those is very high. A doctor doesn't put a cause of death unless they are very, very sure. And my suggestion for why death rates are probably low now is possibly people lost their lives a bit earlier than they should have last year with COVID. So. That could explain that. Okay. But I disagree with the fact that COVID was put on death certificates when patients didn't die of COVID. Could that have happened in a rare occasion? Yes. Did that happen as a rule? No.
OK, we will move on in a second. Keep your calls coming, 0345 6060 973. You're listening to Cross Question. It's 17 minutes past 8.
LBC at
8 on LBC. Lots of voices you may recognise on the programme today, not least David Mellor. We have Bushra in Ruislip with us, Chris in Richmond, and Ross Clark, Telegraph and Spectator journalist. Let's go to Rachel in Maidenhead for our next question. Hello, Rachel.
Hello, thank you. When should we expect a proper return to international travel and get information about specific countries on the red list and how they can get off them? The government should recognise that there are lots of people who need to travel abroad to live, work, see family, etc., and it's not just for holiday.
Now, Chris in Richmond, I'm going to come to you first on this because you have direct experience of how confusion can cause, well, quite a lot of aggro, don't you?
I do. So I went to South America, to Argentina, to see my wife's family at Christmas, and we went there being allowed to go there. We didn't break any lockdown rules, got there, and then within a few days, my brother was texting me furiously saying, they're going to put hotel quarantine when you come back. And we had about sort of 4 or 5 days of sleepless nights thinking, well, how's it going to work? So it is very stressful. And I have to say that a lot of people talk about travel as if it's sort of a jolly, but for a lot of people, it's very difficult. One of my best friends from university came from Australia a couple of weeks ago to bury his mother. And he'd been to the UK a few weeks before, had to quarantine, go back to Australia, stay in a hotel, get a call from his dad saying, your mum's died. Float back to the UK, quarantine again, go back to Australia. Now, that's horrible. And that's probably the worst example I've seen. I do think we need certainty very soon. We need the transport industry to be supported. Heathrow and Hounslow and Crawley, I believe, are some of the highest furlough rates in the country. Aviation is fundamental to our economy, and people live in this country, immigrants, need certainty as to when they can go and visit their families and for them to come and visit us. So the sooner the better, as far as I'm concerned, particularly for people that have already had their vaccines.
So you think that the whole travel system should be opened up normally, so there should be no restrictions at all?
I think for the red list countries, I agree that the hotel system needs to stay. But I think for every other country, if you're double jabbed, I have no problem with people travelling and not needing to isolate on the way back. Because as Andrew Castle said a couple of hours ago on LBC, at what point do we allow people to travel again? If people have been vaccinated, what more can they do?
Ross Clark, that's quite a convincing argument, isn't it? You think, well, what was the vaccination programme for if we're not only going to be able to open up the economy, but also to go back to relatively normal travel rules? We might as well not have been vaccinated if we don't do that fairly soon.
Well, exactly. I mean, this is the absurdity of it. I mean, we're told we're going to need vaccination passports to go to nightclubs and large sports venues and so on the grounds that vaccination supposedly prevents us spreading the disease. But then when it comes to, going abroad and coming back into the country, vaccination seems to count for nothing. It sort of, the policy works on the assumption that it's absolutely no use whatsoever in preventing spread of the disease. And I'm pleased that Chris brought up the example of his family, because so often this debate is just sort of held in terms of sort of people going on a 2-week holiday to Spain, of course, and it's not. It's about families reuniting. It's about people traveling for work. It's about people being trapped abroad. And my son lives in Moscow. He's over for a rare visit for at the moment. He hasn't been here for couple of years. He's been double vaccinated. He's had COVID fairly recently, so he's got all the antibodies from that. He's had to pay for these numerous tests. He had to isolate for 5 days, and then he was told if he paid for another test, he could then be freed from this isolation. But then, he had a couple of hours free, and then he got ding-dong on the phone. Sorry, you've got to isolate again because perhaps somebody on the aeroplane tested positive for COVID. And yet, he'd shown 3 negative tests since he'd been on that aircraft. And it's just utterly ludicrous. And I think what's going on here is that the government wants to give us the impression that we're free to travel, yet at the same time, it's officially discouraging us from travel. It's sort of a mental game that's going on, a mind game to achieve some policy.
Well, their logic presumably is that the less people travel, the less likely they are to import COVID into the country, and particularly new variants. So there is a certain logic to it.
Well, yeah, but if you look at this, amber watch list, which I'm pleased to say seems to have been dropped now. You look at the countries on it. There's only one of the countries, Spain, actually has a higher infection rate than we do, and you'd think it's sort of ludicrous to, take a country like Greece, which has much lower infection rate than us, and then tell people, you go over there, come back, you've got to stay in a hotel for 10 days. It's sort of utterly ridiculous.
Bushra.
So I think the vaccine has been a game changer, and vaccinations.
But it doesn't feel like that, does it? That's the problem. Because if they keep continuing to impose these restrictions, people think, well, yeah, what was the vaccine for then?
Well, it has been. So if you look at the pictures in Heathrow today, we're welcoming double vaccinated people from the EU and America. And I think that's wonderful, as Ross and Chris have said, travel is so important for families to be together in the economy. However, we have to remember we are coming out of a global pandemic, and to open the floodgates would be a mistake. And we're not. So we're allowing double vaccinated people through. We're still asking them to do a test at day 2, not at day 8, because by definition, the variants that will get through with the double vaccinated will be those that are resistant to the vaccine. So yes, we can, resume travel, but with that level of caution.
So you're happy with what they've announced on EU and Americans coming in with double vaccination?
I'm very happy with that. And hopefully, as things progress, as numbers reduce, vaccinations numbers go up, the risk of variants reduce, perhaps we won't need to do PCR tests. But if you open the floodgates, it's a very dangerous strategy.
David Mellor.
Well, it's perfectly obvious that travel will be difficult because each individual country determines its own rules, and so there's no way it's ever going to get any easier for the foreseeable future, which is why I'm shuttling between London and Dorset. I don't miss airports.
But you used to travel a lot, didn't you?
I did. But I don't see the point. Somebody was caught up, a friend of mine, in a 4-hour queue to try and get back into this country because of so many people who are supposed to be checking whether you're valid or not, having been pinged. And I just don't see the point of getting too wound up about it. I think the other interesting thing is how little reason there actually is for a lot of business people to travel in this day where you can have really very live experiences of conferences where you don't actually have to be physically in the same room. Sure. So I can't get too wound up about it. I think people have got to be flexible. I spend 5 or 6 weeks abroad every summer. I loved it. Now I veg out in my old home area of the Purbex, and I'm really enjoying that. Perhaps it's an age thing, Ian. I don't know.
Well, I couldn't possibly comment on that, seeing as I'm going to be vegging out in Norfolk for the next couple of weeks after this week. But anyway, Rachel, quick comment from you.
Yes, so I've got a few actually. So first of all, my dad has been double vaccinated with Pfizer since February. He's in the United Arab Emirates. They've got an app that they've been using for a year now with vaccine passports, whereas there are places in the US who have pieces of paper to show that they're vaccinated. So why isn't the UAE's vaccination Pfizer? Why isn't that all right? Why isn't that allowed to do double, to miss out on the quarantine like the rest of the people? We've had 1,000 COVID cases a day for the last 3-4 months. Our amount of deaths in total are less than the UK's, than one of the days in the UK. It's just ludicrous. And yeah, you can say, oh yeah, we need to not open the floodgates. But at the same time, what about those who haven't seen their family in 18 months, 20 months, have no idea when they're going to be able to go home, who are locked out of their home country, who are British residents and British passport holders, who aren't immigrant? And I understand everyone needs to see their family and we shouldn't open the floodgates, but why isn't our Pfizer vaccine enough? Why isn't there ability for the UAE to figure out how to get off the red list? And because we've heard nothing, we don't fly to any of the countries that are on the UK's red list anymore. We don't fly to South Africa, India, or any of the other countries. So what's the problem? There's been no information, nothing.
I completely agree with you.
Rachel, thank you very much indeed for your call. More of your calls in a moment. 0345 6060 973. It's 8:30. News headlines with Andy Ivy.
It's understood the idea of an amber watch list of countries being introduced under international travel rules has been dropped by the government. The proposal, meaning destinations could move to the red list at short notice, had been criticised by the travel industry and some Conservative MPs. Fewer people are going to be told to self-isolate by the NHS COVID app in England and Wales, in a move the government says will reduce disruption. From now on, contacts of asymptomatic cases will only be pinged if they were together when they were most infectious. Team GB's double Olympic champion Adam Peaty says it's important he takes a few months off from the sport for his mental well-being. The record-breaking swimming team has arrived home from Tokyo, where he became the first Briton to retain an Olympic title in the pool. LBC Weather: heavy showers and thunderstorms across southern areas tonight with localised flooding. Dry elsewhere, lows ranging from 8 to 15. Tomorrow, sunny spells and scattered showers, a high of 21 degrees.
LBC.
On LBC. We have two regular LBC callers on our panel today, Chris in Richmond and Bushra in Ruislip. David Mellor is with us, former Conservative Cabinet Minister, and Ross Clark, Telegraph and Spectator journalist. They're taking your calls by telephone and text. Here's a text one from Imran in Solihull. He says, should the nursery that was reported for allegedly refusing entry for a child of Muslim background, a place, face criminal prosecution? Bushra, I'm going to come to you first on this.
So I heard the story this afternoon. My first reaction was, first of all, I would say you're innocent until proven guilty. So, yes, the story has come out and there's been this accusation. So there needs to be an investigation. But on the face of it, if it does prove to be that this child was discriminated against due to their Muslim name, it's very, very sad, first of all, that this still happens in Britain today. And of course, action needs to be taken if it proves to be the case.
The nursery, we should say, denies it completely. They say that they have Asian owners, that they provide halal meals to Muslim children that they do have on their books. So we should make that clear. Ross Clark.
Well, I mean, I agree with Bushra. I mean, as the story has been described to us, I mean, it's totally unacceptable. It's straightforward discrimination. It's illegal. Would take us back to the sort of 1950s when landlords would put up signs saying no blacks, no Irish, and that sort of thing. But we mustn't hasten to find this nursery guilty before we actually know heard the other side of the story. Because as I understand it, somebody rang up, said, is there a place at the nursery? And a few days later, they rang up about another child, and they were a white child, and said, yes, there is a place. But, were they the same age group? Were they, did a place become available in those 3 days? I just don't know. I mean, you've got to listen to both sides of the stories and investigate these things properly. And unfortunately, in this day and age of Twitter and so on, people tend to jump to conclusions without seeking to hear the full story first.
Well, I suppose you could say, well, he is the SNP health spokesman. Surely he wouldn't have done this unless he was completely convinced that there was a case to answer here. David Mellor, broadening this out, do you think that name discrimination is rife in Britain? For example, when people with a foreign-sounding name apply for a job, it's been proved that they're less likely to get an interview as if they have an English-sounding name.
To be honest, Ian, I have absolutely no idea. We've got so many different names in this country now. I'm surprised if there was discrimination on the basis of names. SNP health spokesman, or whatever he is, might have an incentive to make a fuss about stuff. But look, on the central point, just so we can get this absolutely clear, for somebody to be turned down because of their name perhaps indicating they were Muslim or whatever, is completely wrong, and it's illegal.
Chris?
I think I would say the same as the rest of the three panellists. We do need to get to the bottom of it. We need to make sure that we're not doing trial by Twitter or trial by social media. But if indeed it's proven, then, and it might be difficult to prove, we'll see, then it's completely unacceptable.
Let's go to Matt in Manchester for our next question. Hello, Matt.
Hi, Ian. I'd just like to ask, are sportsmen demeaning genuine mental health issues by using them as an excuse for poor performance or failure?
An interesting question, given the plethora of sportsmen and women over the past few weeks who have cited mental health issues for the fact that they can't continue. We had Ben Stokes, the cricketer, last week. I think Adam Peaty has been talking about it today. Simone Biles, she's now going back into the gymnastics ring. It's not a ring, whatever it is, mat, tomorrow, I think. Ross Clark, what do you say to Matt?
Well, it's certainly become fashionable, hasn't it? I mean, the sort of mental health in all walks of life, we're all sort of aware of it. I mean, in some ways, that's a very good thing. I think that these sports people are perhaps loading it on a bit heavy. Well, it's not they, have a problem with it. Sometimes I think, particularly in Simone Biles' case, there was a sort of tendency to sort of champion her, so a great hero for talking about her mental health issues. I think actually we're probably putting more pressure on her by doing that than if we just sort of left her alone. But, I think you've got to look at the situation particularly the Olympians are in. The incredible pressure and culture of success and disappointment in which they live is an absolute recipe for mental instability. They spent 4 years not earning a lot of money, but often raising a lot of money just to try and improve their performance that little bit, to get over the Olympic hurdle and then to perform. And then, something tiny goes wrong, maybe a positive COVID test, and it's all to no avail and so on. You think that kind of environment is sort of not really conducive to mental health. You've got to be pretty tough to put up with it. And I think, people like Simone Biles, obviously she is hugely tough. And, if even she has reached a situation she can't take anymore, then it's probably a symptom that many more are liable to crack up.
I was watching yesterday when the British athlete in the 100 metres final, whose name escapes me, I'm afraid, he was disqualified because he started too quickly. And I watched him as he walked off, and I'm thinking, how do you cope with that? You've spent the last 4 years, and he had a good chance of getting a medal. I think he got 9.98 in the semi-finals. And given that it was quite an open race, I don't know how you cope with that. But Chris, what do you say to Matt's question? Are sports players demeaning genuine mental health issues?
Well, I've got the T-shirt. I spent 10 years, 20s and 30s, on and off with depression, anxiety, and I've got the invoices to prove it. So I've got there for different reasons. No, I don't think I don't like Ross's comment about it being fashionable. It's sort of slightly patronising and condescending to these people, to be honest with you. I mean, I look at cricket, for example. I'm a massive cricket fan, and you look at what's happened to Ben Stokes. One of his team members lost his dad, Johnny Bairstow. His dad committed suicide, David Bairstow, a long time ago. And a lot of these players, particularly something like cricket, they spend months and months and months away from their home. The England cricket team now are debating whether they should go to Australia if they're not allowed to go with their families. And I can understand that, because yes, they're elite sportsmen, but they need to spend time with their families. It's really important. And I think as much as the pressure of delivering, it's about what goes on around them. We are human beings and we have a life outside our jobs.
David?
Well, I think the whole pretext for the question is completely wrong-headed. These people are not failures. Ben Stokes, a failure. What kind of 24-carat tungsten carbide tipped moron have you got to be to call Ben Stokes a failure? Ben Stokes is a hugely successful cricketer who has overcome a great deal of adversity in his own life, some of it self-induced. And in terms of cricket, he's like Ian Botham. He is one of those swashbuckling cricketers who changes a game. He's not a failure, nor is he excusing failure.
And nor are any of these other athletes.
Of course they're not. I just happen to quote him because you don't be rabbiting on about every athlete who is now confessing that they have mental issues. I've been involved in sport in one way or another for most of my adult life. Before the National Lottery, I was chairman of something called the Sports Aid Foundation, and that provided money to Olympic athletes before they were properly funded. And the privations of some of these people, what they did, a chap who won a gold medal kayaking, sleeping in his van for several days before the race because he couldn't afford to be in a hotel and no one would pay for it. These people, I was a member of Parliament for Putney. I used to walk down by the river. The rain is horizontal, and there were these people out on the river rowing away. It's a huge sacrifice. And if we are now prepared to admit that to be a top sports person is not just a physical challenge, but a mental one, that just shows we're being adult about it. But what is not adult is suggesting that is an excuse for failure. The strain as standards improve, as performances turn on a 1/100th of a second sometimes, of course, it's going to be a huge mental strain. And why shouldn't people admit that?
Am I right in thinking that you were in the cabinet, in fact, at the Department of National Heritage when the National Lottery came in?
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, you must look at the medals that we've won since 2012, the sheer number of them, and take a bit of personal pride in that, don't you? Because, it wouldn't have happened without National Lottery.
No, John Major and I talked a lot about it. I see various other people are being put forward for the person who created it, so I'm not competing for that. But I can tell you this for absolute certainty. John Major and I talked about it a very great deal. Sadly, I was not spared to be able to introduce it, but we were totally committed to it, and in particular, totally committed to the idea that sportsmen should get it, and Cinderella sports particularly, because of course there was always a thing, it should be charities, although we know more now about how charities, or some of them, spend their money. At that time, the great God charity was something we should always do. But I always felt that the money should go because sport is not only a good thing for the people who actually are involved in it in terms of their fitness and getting better, but it's a huge morale boost for the nation. There are plenty of people clustered around their televisions and their radios during these Olympics overwhelmed by some of these stories. It makes us feel good about ourselves. And when you think, the rowers haven't done so well this time, 25 million, they're saying, they should have done better with 25 million. Yes, they should, and it didn't help sacking a world-class coach 12 months before the Olympics, and whoever took that decision deserves to walk the plank, indeed, into a good rowing river. But let me tell you this, I don't think 25 million is a lot of money to spend on a sport which has the potential. Yeah, when you think of the Steve Redgrave days.
Yeah, and we have done so well in it over the last few Olympics. Bushra, back to the question, are sports players demeaning genuine mental health issues?
I think it's such a positive thing that these young people are able to talk about their mental health. I'm sure poor mental health has been around for years in sports, but there would have been a taboo around it. So the fact that these mature, intelligent, successful young people are able to stand up and say, I realise that my mental health is just as important as my physical health to continue my success in my field, it is really, really positive and a good role model and example for everyone else.
Now, this tweet was sent before your last answer, David, from Iain, who says, David Mellor is a bit grumpy this evening. Great listening. Let's get him back on again.
Thank you. But I don't think I'm grumpy. You know what, Iain? When I was in politics, if I thought Boris Johnson was a complete ape, if I was a minister in his government, I was not able to say so. I am now liberated to flog all the way up from Dorset. Not a journey I'm recommending to anybody right now. And I can say what the hell I like.
And we encourage you to do so. And you've got 15 more minutes of doing so, as can our other panellists. It's 8:46.
This is LBC.
Phillips, go.
7:49. David Mellor is here, Ross Clark, Bushra in Ruislip and Chris in Richmond. Michael is in Seaford and has another question. Hi, Michael.
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel. I'd like to ask why the British authorities, the Olympic authorities, and the New Zealand authorities don't accept the GCSE biology definition of male cells all containing XX chromosomes. Male cells all containing XX and XY chromosomes, and female cells all contain XX. XX, in other words, two pairs of XXs in every cell, and that definition is accepted by the forensic police authorities.
So is this a reference to the New Zealand weightlifter who's trans, who competed today? Okay.
Yes, I mean, he's either male or female, depending on what kind of chromosomes are in every cell of his body or his or her body.
So do you believe that, I mean, this athlete has fully transitioned, so therefore is considered to be a woman? You don't think that definition is appropriate here? Is that what you're saying?
I've no idea, Ian, until they test, until you have the forensic test of every cell of the body containing XX and XY being male and XX and XX being female. This is GCSE biology. It's basic science.
Okay, well, let's talk to, I think, the only scientist on the panel, Bushra.
So I can see both sides of the argument. So if this woman has fully transitioned, to tell her, I'm sorry, you have to go and compete with the men, would be very difficult and possibly not fair on her. However, in sports, we've just discussed how people spend all their lives reaching to the top accolades of the Olympics, and then you have to think about, is it fair for the other athletes? On LBC, I was listening to a scientist, so I'm no way an expert in this area, but I was listening to a scientist who was discussing how the definition used in the Olympics is testosterone below 10, but she thought it should be below 5, and also to think about the changes of the body during puberty for a man and how that advantage can't be reversed. So I can see both sides of the story, and yes, I have studied science, but I'm afraid I don't really have the expertise to make a decision.
Okay, Chris.
I'm similar with you, Bushra. I do think there are a couple of points. Testosterone is the one point where we focus on, but there's also things like muscle tone, bone density as well. I mean, I don't have a biology GCSE, by the way, so it isn't a straightforward debate, but I do understand the point of view that actually there are women out there that have tried to get a place and will have lost out, who will feel frustrated. But I do think that what we do have to do as a society...
So just by saying that, you are kind of indicating that you don't consider Laurel Hubbard, this trans weightlifter, a woman.
No, it's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that there are certain, in terms of sport, if the testosterone has been set as the test, but there are other, I guess, measures of that. But I'm not saying that she's not a woman. That she recognises herself as a woman. That's a right we have to accept. I'm not a scientist, so it's very difficult to make a firm opinion on it. But what I will say is I think we have a wider problem as a society where these issues are not being properly debated, or being debated in a very unpleasant manner. Look at the way Joanna Cherry has been treated, and I know you tweeted about that at the weekend, Ian. And she described herself as having a target put on her back by her fellow MPs. And I think there's a wider question about how we debate this, because I think both sides have lost the plot. It's appalling what we've seen.
David.
Well, I actually agree with what both previous answers. I mean, Bushra is obviously impeccable on what she says. You cannot take back what puberty as a male does to elements of physical strength. I mean, and what we've just heard too makes me feel that there are plenty of arguments in my life I blundered into, and this is not one I intend to blunder into. Beyond saying, I have my options, don't I? Beyond saying this, I was not sad that the New Zealand weightlifter didn't do so well, because I am suspicious of someone who competed as a man in weightlifting who then becomes a woman without losing any of the assets, the physical assets, that she had as a man. I think it's a terrible thing that people are so unhappy with the sex that they were born with, that they want to go through the traumas, emotional and physical, of changing. I have every sympathy with them and every joy if that delivers for them a better, more meaningful life. But I do think we do have to think about other competitors, and there are certain things that physical, if you're a man, it gives you certain strength advantages that we just can't ignore.
Ross?
Yeah, I mean, I would not want to exclude anybody from sporting events. I think that Laurel Hubbard and every other trans athlete has to be able to take part in some category. And you get to a problem, if you accept that, somebody who is a man has become a woman, if we're not going to allow them to compete in the women's event, then, they perhaps couldn't be allowed to compete in the men's event either. And I think that the solution that I would propose, and I've thought for a long, long time, is that rather than having men's events and women's events in sport, we should have women's events and we should have open events. And in the open events, men, women, and all shades in between, if you
Cats
like,
and dogs,
against each other. And
it was actually rather wonderful this weekend, I think, too, because I didn't know they were going to do this, to have these mixed swimming, and I think they're going to do athletics relays.
Could I just add the one thing where it does get very sad, and that is some of these athletes who are born with both male and female characteristics. I mean, I'm no expert on, Bushra probably knows a lot more than I do, but that is cruel. That they cannot compete as women, although they have female characteristics. They're not inventing those characteristics or relying on surgery to give them those characteristics. Is it Casta Semenya? I think she was called. She's called the South African distance runner. I feel that's a tragic case.
I mean, surely, work can be done to use muscle mass, bone density, testosterone levels, to make a more accurate matching. And I think the work must be done.
Well, I think you've all walked that particular tightrope rather well. Let's finish off with a text question from Tilly in Thornbury. I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here is to be filmed in Wales for the second successive series. Which reality TV show would you like to go on? David, you must have had offers.
Yes, and I've turned them all down.
Why?
Because I'm not going to go eating grubs down the bottom of it usually was an Australian hotel, wasn't it? You go down the bottom and you eat grubs. And I mean, there are plenty of humiliations that, one can visit on oneself. I've visited a few myself, but that's not one of them.
But is there any reality TV show? I mean, if you literally had to go on one, which one would you pick?
No, I think I'd commit suicide instead.
Not Love Island?
I think that would be an embarrassment, don't you? Love Island for the over 70s.
I think they should do that. I think it would be great television. Chris?
I'm not going to say Love Island because my wife's watching tonight. I would say probably The Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, but I'm not a celebrity, so I'm going to be stuck. I think.
This is your first road on the way to celebrity, Chris. Don't forget that. Ross?
Honestly, I've never ever watched any of these programs.
Oh, you don't know what you've missed.
And maybe I've missed something, but I think LBC is the closest I've ever got to reality TV, and I'm happy to do.
I'm not sure that's a compliment.
I think where you're going, grubs in forests and undressing, having sex with people you met 5 minutes beforehand. That's not for me. I think I'll opt out of them.
Bushra?
I've always found them quite cringe as well. I couldn't really watch Big Brother. I once tried to apply for Bake Off. I don't know if that sort of classifies.
That would be good. No,
that's the sort of middle class reality TV show.
No, but that's that's not. That's you've got to be very skilled to do that.
I realised that
you could partner up on that.
I realised that I couldn't actually bake because they tell you to give examples of all the things you've made, and I realised I can only make shortbread and lemon drizzle, so I don't think I'm qualified. Yeah,
but that might do very well.
Because I think my agent has put me forward for that.
Oh, the celebrity one.
Yeah, which I can't cook at all. So I said, I don't know what you're bothering to do that for. The one I would love to do with my friend Jackie Smith is Celebrity Hunted, but I don't. But we don't. Neither of us regard us. It's where you have to evade the police. You go on the run, basically. I think that would be a really fun.
You spend your life doing that. Don't you?
Well, that's very true.
I think that would be such a funny show, Ian. You evading the police.
I think that. Well, I usually manage to, but on the odd occasion it hasn't quite worked. But enough of that.
I think they should get Lord Lucan for that one.
Well, or John Stonehouse. I'm going to be interviewing his daughter tomorrow about his disappearance. Those of you of a certain age will know who I'm talking about. David Mellor, Chris in Richmond, Ross Clark, Bushra from Ruislip. Thank you very much, Bushra. And Chris, you've both been like old pros at this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's as if you've been doing it all your life.
Yeah. We can step aside, Ian, knowing
Thank you.
that the seat will be safe with them.
Indeed. Right, coming up in a moment, we're going to talk more about this story from the Scottish Health Secretary, Humza Yousaf, who's accusing a local nursery of essentially blocking his child from going to the nursery because she has a Muslim name. I wonder if you have ever had that experience yourself, where your name, you think, has maybe cost you a job. 0345 6060 973. It's 1 minute past 9.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, it's understood the Prime Minister has rejected the idea of an amber travel watch list being brought in this week. The proposals, meaning countries could move to the red